Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Serge, and welcome to another episode of Search for the Truth. And my goal is to educate people, empower people with a different knowledge to help them. And today we're going to talk about the different topics. Usually we talk about nutrition, about health, but I'm really excited actually to have my following guest, Mr. Gramps. Welcome to the show.
I'll tell you, that music really jazzed me up. I'm ready to go.
Oh, I'm so excited. So
Yeah.
if you guys have any question, please let me know in the comment section so I can ask my guest about this, about questions that you may have. So first of all, Mr. Grams, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what is your goal with what you're doing right now?
Well, what I've recently done is written a children's book called I Don't Want to Turn Three. And, this came about because living in the past year with all this pandemic that we had, just really gave me a chance to be in isolation with my grandkids. And
Yeah.
so this gave me time to watch them, interact with them, and get a feel for really, how they act. And what a trip that was, I got to tell you. All six of my grandkids have completely different personalities. I mean, they the ones that have in common is they have this sense of curiosity. And how excited they get when something good happens to them. So watching them grow year to year and how they interact with each other really is the basis for my book.
Awesome. And I want to show the cover of the book. I'm going to put it on the screen. So this is the cover. I don't want to turn through, like you said. So what is the actual purpose of that book at the end of the day?
Well, the book is a true story. I mean, it's based on facts. All the pictures in the book are pictures that I took of the kids, and then the illustrator made them look like cartoons. Like, for instance, the picture you just showed was Levi and Jackson in the bathtub, and that's what they look like, and that's how they were. So it's all based on what they were doing. So the real theme of the book, and it's a theme really for all of us, is at what age do you really take responsibility for your actions? Is it 3 years old? Is it 13 years old? Is it 23 years old? I mean, I'm a baby boomer and I've got plenty of people at 63 that still don't take responsibility for their actions.
I would concur with that, actually. I would agree with that. It's sad, but true fact.
It gave me a chance to watch when do kids really know the difference between me and us? When do they really learn how to share? And so that's also part of this book.
Yeah. I mean, you seem to have a passion and interest about your kids, grandkids, and it seems that you came to the conclusion that grandparents specifically lack involvement into these kids. So how did you come up with that conclusion?
Well, as a baby boomer myself, trying to understand the world as it evolved since I was 3 years old is also kind of part of the story. My parents didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cable TV. They didn't have remotes. I was my dad's remote. He said, "Son, go change the channel." And I was the remote of that day. So, my parents' definition of discipline is completely different than discipline of today. Is this a better world for children to grow up in? I'll let your listeners kind of answer that question. Compared to how we were treated as kids. And so that's really what it is. It's comparing the grandparent generation to the generation that's coming along today.
Yeah, there's a big gap, a big difference. And you mentioned discipline. I think this is, to me, one of the major factors behind what's going on with this generation of kids is there's a lack of disciplines in their life. It means that the parents don't seem to discipline them, that they lack discipline, they don't know how. So, what is your definition of disciplines and what we need to do to guide kids today in their life?
Well, keep in mind that we are all role models for these young kids. And whether we're the parents or the grandparents, they imitate us. So
Yeah.
if you're the parent and you're on your cell phone all day long or you're on your computer all day long, you're going to see that reflection in how what happens to your children. Now, discipline, I think discipline has evolved. Okay, I think discipline may be better today than it was when I was growing up. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. Okay, and my parents were the generation. They really were the greatest generation. I mean, they went through the Depression. They fought in World War II. They helped get this country where it is today, the democracy that it is today. They fought for all that, but it was a very disciplined generation, okay? And they had to, because they were under stress for 20, 30 years. So when I grew up, discipline was a lot different. I mean, my brother Larry and I, if we got in trouble at home, my mom would say to us, "Wait till your dad gets home." And he would come home and he'd whip out his belt and he would chase us around the kitchen table, and and that was discipline back then. In fact, he had this fraternity paddle, and he kept it in his closet. And one night when they were out of the house, my brother and I went in. We took his fraternity paddle. We lived up in Ohio, and it was late fall, and the leaves were on the ground. And we took that paddle, we buried it underneath the leaves. And then the next day it snowed. And then all of a sudden, in the spring, we went to take a look for the paddle. It was gone. To me, that was my miracle. It was like, oh, they're looking out for us. Maybe this will save the discipline that we have. So I think my generation learned from that. And, we used our kids, as we were raising our kids, we tried to talk them through, when what was right and what was wrong. We weren't chasing them around the kitchen table. At least most of us weren't. And so I think our kids grew up smarter in discipline. And I think they do okay in discipline today. I've got 3 daughters with 2 kids each, and they all discipline pretty much the same way. They all send them to timeout. So you're a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kid, and your mom and dad says you're in timeout. You got to go against the wall. You can't talk to anybody. All you got to do is look at the wall. That's pretty heavy. That's a great way of discipline. In fact, another way of discipline that I saw recently is my granddaughter Grace just turned 3, and we went to her house in Austin, Texas for the birthday party. And she was, playing with her older brother, who's 4.5, and they're starting to fight over some trucks and some toys. And she looks at him and she says, "I need my space." And she actually, 3-year-old, walks over to one side of the sofa and sits down there. And he says to her, "I need my space too." And he walks over to the other side. Now, they didn't learn that on television or through the internet. I am sure their mother at one time got so frustrated with both of them and looked at them and says, "I need my space." And she walked away, and they're imitating her. So those are great ways of disciplining today. So I think the kids are growing up with this better way of discipline than when I grew up.
I concur with that. I was disciplining the old-fashioned ways myself, like you said. It was no fun at all.
That's for sure.
It was a bit painful. And you mentioned electronics, right? One thing that I have noticed, I'm sure you've seen the same thing as well, is it seems that parents and kids don't have relationship and communication anymore. It's all about, take the iPad, take the cell phone, watch a movie, play some games. I mean, it seems to be the next babysitter is the electronics. So can you help us a little bit? Can you guide parents or grandparents when it comes to electronics? Because I feel that that's a big factor as well of how kids are being raised today.
Well, first of all, I think this generation, these kids that are 1 to 10 years old today, really are the best generation that this country has ever produced. And I really think that they are going to be fabulous leaders of tomorrow, and they're going to really bring us back to where we should be as a country. So it's a combination. You also realize this is the first generation that is completely electronic. I mean, from the day they were born, they learned about the iPhones and telephones, and and the tablets and the internet. They have so much information coming at them so much earlier than I did. When I was a kid, I went out and played in the park. Here, these kids are automatically being exposed to all kinds of information. So the role of grandparents today, and obviously parents too, is to balance that. Because what happens as you grow older, each decade you get older, you do get a little wiser. Now, that happens because you make more mistakes. So you learn from those mistakes, and you really realize what there is to life and how to maneuver through life. So the grandparents' job really is to balance what they're learning on the internet and all this electronics, because that stuff is great. It's our job to do that. And
Yeah.
probably the smartest thing that we can do as grandparents is make sure that we read to our children all the time, that we are reading books to our kids, that we are balancing the internet with all kinds of books. Now, think about books. We all got 20 different books laying around the house for children. And obviously I want them to read my book. I don't want to turn 3, but there's 100 other great books out there too.
Yeah.
So but think about it. When a grandparent gets a book and reads with the child, all the benefits start to happen. First thing that happens is you become bonded with a child. So you got a little kid sitting on your lap, and you've got this book open, and you're spending 20 minutes with them going through a book. That's true bonding, which is what we need to do. That helps offset whatever thing that they're learning. So we've got to make sure that we stay in the process of reading books to kids. Another reason we should be reading books to kids is it supports listening skills. Now, you and I both know, as we grow older, that listening skills are the best skills that we can have.
Yeah.
Because if we can listen right, then we can learn, and we can communicate, and we can sell, and we can do whatever we need to do. But we got to learn how to listen. So if you take that time, the 20 minutes to read a book to a child, it's going to help with that listening skills. It's going to help make that discipline for listening skills. Another reason why we should be reading to children is because it helps develop the cognitive and the language development. I mean, they're going to see words in these books they've never heard before. Well, it gives you a chance to kind of talk to them, explain it to them. So it helps with that all knowledge, rather than being just shot stuff at them from the internet. They're going to you talk to them, you explain to them what it's all about. And another reason, that we've got to be reading to kids is it helps with their attention span. Little kids, 2, 3, 4, 5, they bounce off the wall all day long. But if you have them in your lap for 20 minutes and you can give them this attention span, that's a trait that as they get older, as they go through school, as they go through life, it's really going to help. So we have got to offset what they're doing. And again, what they're learning is great through the internet, but we've got to bring it back to make sure that they have a well-rounded growing up. Because again, this is going to be the best generation we have ever seen.
It's so fascinating what you just said, because funny enough, last weekend, my daughter and I went through old stuff, and we found a box of old books. And my daughter is a teenager, and she made a comment that, "Remember, Daddy, when you were reading those books with me?" So I didn't realize the impact of just spending some time reading a few minutes, some books, and still today, 15 years later, she still remembers those moments.
Oh yeah, I
Amazing.
mean, it really is. When you think about the memories it creates, that she's going to remember that when she's 40 years old. That you spent that
Exactly.
time together. Another reason why we have to sit down and read these books to these kids is because one of the best things that we can do as adults is it's necessary to teach children how to think, not what to think. They're going to learn on their own what to think. But
Yeah.
it's necessary for us to teach them how to think. And books do that. Because if you think about it, again, when you're reading a book to a child, let them pick it out. Okay? Again, we all got these books laying around. Let them find the book for you. That way they are immediately engaged in the whole process. So once they bring the book, the first thing you want to ask them is, what do you think is going to happen in this book? Again, we're trying to teach them how to think. So before you even open the book, say to them, what do you think is going to happen? Then, while you're reading the book, say to them things like, who are the characters in the book? What is the setting of this book? Let them keep thinking. Let them keep thinking. Because again, we want to teach them to think. And then, as you're reading through the book, does anything in this book sound familiar to you? Have you or your friends ever experienced it? Have you seen this? And then after you're done reading the book, much like you should be doing every night at dinner time when you ask them, how was your day? What was the best part? What was your favorite part of this book? So continue to ask them these questions because, again, That's what we as grandparents and the parents have to do to supplement everything else they're doing, is to challenge their minds. And books, I mean, they're the best. They really are. And they'll have the memories like your daughter did.
And one of the sad part of those kids today is once in a while I meet kids, young kids, and they've never touched a book. It's all on the phone, on iPads. To me, they're missing something. Having a book and open it up and read it, it's a different experience than using an iPad or phone.
Well, the saddest thing that's happened with this pandemic is, according to the United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural organization called UNESCO, 584 million worldwide children are experiencing reading difficulties. Think of that number,
Oh,
584
wow.
million.
Yeah.
That's compared to 460 million the year earlier. So this whole pandemic thing we just went through, where kids were out of school, kids weren't reading, that's a 20% rise in 1 year of kids not being able to read. That wipes out 2 decades of educational gains around the
Wow.
world that we've had with kids. The Stanford School of Education released a study recently that said that second and third graders' fluency is now 30% behind of what it was during a typical year. So we've got to make all that up. Okay. And, we hope our schools will, but they haven't been in school for 2 years. So that's another reason why we as parents and grandparents have got to be taking the time to read to our kids. And, it's not just us. Every family doesn't have a mom and dad. There's single parents who are raising kids. So it really does take a village. It takes aunts and uncles and cousins and nephews. It takes the whole village to get us back there. I mean, these are scary numbers. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to make up for that. But if we as adults and we as grandparents and we as parents, make sure that we take the time and make a routine of this. If your kid, make sure your kid has a bath every night. And after that, make sure they're reading to them. Now, it's much harder today than it was when I was growing up. When I was growing up, my uncle lived up the street, my grandmother lived a couple blocks away, and we had a whole village there. But in today's world, taking me for an example, I've got 2 grandkids here with me in Arizona. I've got 2 grandkids that are in Austin, Texas. I got 2 grandkids in Orlando, Florida. And they're scattered all over. And it's tough to be the village. It's tough to make up for that. And so you've got to come up with ways to get your kids to relate to you and make you be involved in what they're doing. Keep in mind the 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, they're not going to pick up the phone and call you. That's just not the way it is. They got their other priorities. They do their own thing.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So you as the adult have got to do that. Now, I'll give you an example of something we did, and maybe your listeners can come up with some other ideas of how they did it. But, during the pandemic, I had all 6 of them here for 6 weeks because they weren't working. They all came to us for a while. So that's what the book is based on, watching them. But during that time, I saw that all these kids, all these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, they love dinosaurs. Now, I don't know why they love dinosaurs, but they can name every single dinosaur there is out there. I mean, you got these 3-year-olds that give this long name for these dinosaurs. They tell me if they eat meat. As far as I'm concerned, dinosaurs are small, medium, and large, but they know exactly what this is all about. So I noticed that the one thing that they all had in common, the one light that they always talked about, were dinosaurs. So when they left our house, the kids in Texas and in Florida, we've got 6 dinosaurs around our house. So we decided that every night that we're going to put the dinosaurs someplace different in the house so that we can connect with our kids and become part of their routine. So for instance, one night they were in the refrigerator eating blueberries. The next night they were at the sink with grandma with soap on their nose, washing the dishes. The next night they were playing the piano. The next night they were walking up the steps. So this happened for 50 different nights inside our house. And the kids could relate because they were here for a while. So they understood. So we became part of their routine. They take their bath, the parents would read them a book, and then they would say to mom and dad, let's call Gramps. What are the dinosaurs doing tonight? So they would call on my wife's iPhone, and we'd do FaceTime, and they say, where's Gramps? Where's Gramps? Where are the dinosaurs? So that was our way of keeping in touch with them, a way to keep them, and be part of the village of raising them. And I'm sure there's other ways to do that too, but we've got to make that effort, especially with our families just being so scattered today versus what it was a few generations ago.
Yeah, we do have a question from one of our listeners. I'm going to put it on the screen so we can see Miss Socorro. She says, discipline has been substituted by the media. How do we compete with that? That's a good question.
Discipline has been substituted by the media. I'm not a grandma yet, but I'm a baby boomer. I'm afraid today's parents are not parenting.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, since you're a baby boomer, just like I'm a baby boomer, 40% of baby boomers really don't want to get too much involved in their grandkids' raising. It's an amazing number. It really is. The baby boomers say, "Hey, I raised the kid. I raised him right." They'll do that. I got other things to worry about. Well, especially with what happened with COVID, and especially with these kids running behind and the reading, we have got to throw ourselves into it. The baby boomers is a generation that made a difference and was very active in creating this country the way it is today. Now we've got to get back into it and help our children, help their kids. We just have to do it. We've got, again, the wisdom. We've been around a long time. We made a lot of mistakes. So let's use that to help them. And so that's why we have to get in with the discipline. Again, the media is out there. We're all exposed to it. It's the role of parents and grandparents to offset that by being involved with their kids' lives.
So you mentioned earlier that the reading skill has decreased because of the pandemic, and IQ has decreased as well. So kids have more difficulties this time. So would you be in favor of the parents or maybe the grandparents to be involved in homeschooling, for example? I think it seems there's more and more people opting for these options to try to get their kids better.
I think it's a combination. One of the great things about going to school is the socialization. Again,
Yeah.
kids have to learn socialization. You can't do that. Parent can't teach them that. Again, that's one of the other things. We can teach them how to think, but we're not going to teach them how to act. They've got to learn that from what they see. So homeschooling is always great on top of regular schooling, but I think the socialization of going to school and interacting with teachers that are beyond, have different knowledge than what your parents have is, again, part of the village process of raising a kid. A kid needs to be exposed to all kinds of different ways of life, so when they grow up, they can make a decision on how they want to live.
That's a really good point. So kids needs to be around people, and I've seen that people who keep their kids at home, they tend to be a little bit more lonely, a little bit more isolated. It's really important for them to go to school, but sometimes, like you said, there's an issue. The school is not open. Things are not working out like they want to. So that would be an option, I guess, for people. And there's homeschooling co-op as well, where you can go and meet other kids and so on. So at what age do the kids learn the difference between themselves and other people?
Well, I think we all learn at different ages, and that's why you want to start them at 2, 3, and 4.
So young, yeah.
So that they can see that, and so it's important for us to be doing that with them, and teaching them how to question. We want our kids to learn how to question. Sometimes they become a real pain and they question you on things that you want them to question, but that's part of growing up, and that's part of becoming a real person. And again, that's why we got grandparents involved. They've gone through it, so get in there and teach these kids.
So what would be the best piece of advice you could give parents or grandparents in this case to have their grandkids to get started? Because a lot of baby boomers or grandparents are a bit confused. They don't really know what to do to help them. What would be one advice to give them?
Well, we talked about always asking questions. We were reading a book, asking a question. I think there's a question that every parent and grandparent should start asking their child when they're 2 and 3 years old. And that is, what did you do today that was nice to someone else? Okay. And, the
Yeah.
first time you ask your kid that question, they're going to look at you like, what are you talking about? And,
Yes.
but, they stole their cousin's toys. They took away the dolls. They know when they didn't do something nice. So the first 2 or 3 times, they're not going to understand that. But then all of a sudden, if you ask that question to them every day, maybe at dinner time, what did you do today that was nice to someone else? All of a sudden, then they're going to, rather than stealing their cousin's trucks, they're going to say, I shared my truck with my cousin. And that's just the beginning. And if we
Yeah.
ask that question every day, then after a week or so, the kids are going to want to say, well, I need to kind of impress my parents. I got to do something nice to somebody. So the dinner time, when they ask me, I got an answer. And, but can you imagine if we had everyone in this youngest generation thinking like that? What did you do nice to someone else today? By the time they grow up to adults, how that will change this country.
It would
Can you
change the
imagine?
whole country. Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine what was the impact it would have on our country today? If we
That
can
sounds
get this,
amazing.
if we can get this youngest generation to start thinking that way.
Yeah. Yeah. We do have a comment from this gentleman. So grandparents just give sugar now. That's a comment that I hear a lot. I am in the nutrition field, right? So a lot of time my clients complain that the grandparents give them sugar and candy and all that junk. So what do you say? What do you reply to this kind of comments?
Well, you got to remember that the grandparents create memories. Again,
Yes.
you remember this thing, but they create good and bad memories. I'll give you an example. I a couple weekends ago, we had the two kids here from Scottsdale over the weekend because their parents went out of town. And so we were the great grandparents. I mean, we took them to the park, we went to the zoo, we went to the museum. We played we played tennis, we played kickball. We have a Wii, which is something from 20 years ago that you can play on your television. We're playing those kinds of things. So we did all the great things the grandparents do. Well, on Saturday night, you know, Levi, who was a very picky eater, he wouldn't eat some stuff, and his grandmother said to him, unless you eat that, you will not be able to watch TV. I'm not going to let you watch any TV. So they went into this big argument, and so that was it. The next day, when we turned them back over to their parents, Olivia, who's the older one, said, "Oh, we had a great time. We went to the park. I played some ball. The only thing Levi remembered was Grandma made me eat something I don't like." Now, I can guarantee you that when he's 30 years old, that's what he's going to remember.
Yes.
His grandmother forced him. So we create those memories. We're the ones who help do the good and the bad. And we just got to think about how can we create the good memories? Because again, the kids, the good thing about grandparents is we can give them back. We get them for a weekend, then we get them back. I got to tell you, they wore me out. When they went to take their nap, I had to take my nap, because, that's the way it is. But that's one of the great things about being a grandparent.
Awesome. That's so right. Kids remember everything when it comes to these things. So, Mr. Grams, so how can people reach out to you or get your book, for example, or get more information about how to be more involved with the kids and grandkids? Because you have quite a bit of resources, actually. I'm really impressed by that.
So yes, you can buy the book, I Don't Want to Turn 3, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, about 100 other places on the internet. Also, you can come to my site. It's grampsjeffrey.com. And I'd love to continue this conversation with anyone listening. Feel free to email me at grampsjeffrey@gmail.com. And I'd be glad to talk to you about that. So, but yes, there's some resources on my site and so forth to talk about what we can do. And you're right. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody.
Thank you. I think when you reached out to me a few months ago, I was really impressed and intrigued by what you have to say. And it makes a lot of sense. If the grandparents would be more involved, it would make a difference in these kids' generation.
If I was to leave you with one thing today, is when you love, you will teach others to love. And that's really the role of grandparents. When you
Yeah,
show love to these kids, it's going to teach them to love.
that's true.
And, that's part of our role also.
What great advice. Thank you so much, Mr. Gramps, for your time and talking about this really amazing topic.
I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a good rest of the day to you all.
You too.